Welcome back to Newt's World, and welcome to part 2 of How to Win 2026. In our first episode, I laid out why this election is really a fight between two versions of reality, and I previewed the 4 building blocks which I believe can define the Democratic Party as unacceptable to most Americans for at least a generation. Now we deliver on the first one. Building block 1 of this platform is defining and winning the argument that the Democratic Party has become the party of big government socialism and the destructive ideas that increasingly define its coalition. This is a long episode because the case is long, and I'd rather give it to you complete than give it to you inadequately. Here's the roadmap. First, how did the Democrats get here from the party of Franklin Roosevelt and John Kennedy to what it is today? Then the sequence from this year's State of the Union that captures the moment. After that, a real roll call, real names, real quotes, real dates, organized around 4 themes: abolishing ICE and open borders, defunding the police, hostility to Israel, and abolishing the Senate itself. Then the quotes that don't just criticize policy, but denigrate the United States outright. After that, what this coalition actually believes about free enterprise. Then the votes, the actual roll calls in Congress that prove this is the whole party, not just a bunch of loud voices, but you'll see vote after vote where they're unanimous on the same side. Then we'll close with the corruption that provides the money that this machine runs on, including a brand new congressional report that names names. Let's start at the beginning. The Democratic Party has an extraordinary history. Founded by Thomas Jefferson as the Democratic Republican Party, it is the longest surviving political organization in the world. It's an amazing institution, even though I'm a Republican. I have enormous respect as a historian. And at times, it's produced leaders who sort of define the country, who reach out to have a natural majority. Franklin Roosevelt in the 20th century was probably the most effective of those leaders, elected 4 times to the presidency, a remarkable speaker, brought the country together through radio back then. John F. Kennedy personified the beginning of modern television politics. He was so young, so attractive, so articulate, so effective on the screen. And they really represented clearly a majority of Americans. In fact, much of the modern Republican Party's challenge is to overcome what was a 90-year dominance by the Roosevelt coalition, which taught Republicans, unfortunately, to behave as though they were the natural minority. So this was a great institution. And then what happened? Well, we'll never know for sure. But I think part of it was the assassination, first of President Kennedy, then of Martin Luther King Jr., and then of Senator Robert Kennedy, and the sense of everything falling apart, that the idealism people believed in, the hope they had for a better future, disintegrated, and Lyndon Johnson, who was a very effective politician, but culturally came across in a way that large parts of the country, which had loved the Kennedys, simply couldn't adjust to Johnson. And from that point on, everything got worse. In 1964, there were riots at the Chicago Convention. In 1968, the party was coming apart, and George Wallace took about a third of the party with him as a third-party candidate. You had an effort to bring the party back, first with Jimmy Carter, who was a real reformer, but frankly had no roots in the modern Democratic Party. He was basically the strange combination of Georgia peanut farmer and nuclear submariner from Annapolis. And so he came and he went. And then you had a serious effort, to give him credit, Bill Clinton coming from Arkansas, even though he'd been a Rhodes Scholar, he had gone to Yale, he knew that you had to bring the Democratic Party back towards the center. And part of the reason we got so much done with him was that he wanted to be a centrist president, not a left-wing president. That, of course, enraged the left. And in fact, you could tell almost as soon as Clinton left office, you could actually tell a little bit with Al Gore's campaign in 2000. If Gore had allowed Clinton to campaign more, Gore probably would have won. But Gore represented the way the left felt, and the left felt betrayed because everything that we thought was a victory, they thought was the sellout. That was the last real opportunity to keep the party from moving to the left. By 2008, it's nominating Barack Obama, who's almost certainly the most radical president ever elected, and the party has moved. And Nancy Pelosi from San Francisco sort of personifies the scale of the move. This is no longer the party of Tip O'Neill or the party of Sam Rayburn. This is now a party increasingly of liberals and radicals. And that got us to where we are today, because that party has just continued to move to the left. After the break, the moment from this year's State of the Union that tells you everything you need to know about where the Democratic Party is right now. At this year's State of the Union, President Trump looked directly at the Democrats who wouldn't stand to applaud protecting Americans. And he said, "Nobody stands up. These people are crazy. I'm telling them they're crazy. Don't just take my word for it. I want you to listen to this, not just hear me describe it."
Look, nobody stands up. These people are crazy. I'm telling you, they're crazy.
A president stating a position that by every poll we've walked through in this series, 70 to 90% of the Americans agree with. And an entire side of the House chamber sitting on their hands, refusing to stand for a point most of their own voters back home would applaud. That's not a policy disagreement. That's a party that's learned to treat basic, broadly popular statements as partisan provocations. Because standing up has itself become a factional signal inside their coalition. Our job as Republicans is to convince people that even the Democratic member of Congress they personally like back home, once they get to Washington, become part of that room. Nobody had to say a word. The cameras did it for us. And the fact is, your member was a member of Congress on the Democratic Party. They did not stand. Now, let's turn that into a real roll call. Real names, real quotes, real dates, starting with what this coalition actually wants to do about ICE and the border. And remember, ICE is simply a code for their entire border policy. They don't want ICE because they don't want to police illegal immigrants, because they don't want the border to be controlled. So, abolish ICE originally was kind of a fringe slogan, handful of left-wingers. Now, it's a mainstream part of this Democratic Party. It'll clearly be in their platform across the country. People are campaigning on it. Francesca Hong, the Wisconsin State Assemblywoman who narrowly lost this year's Democratic gubernatorial primary by about 4,000 votes, about half a point. She told a Milwaukee Governors Forum in January that ICE is a, quote, rogue agency that no longer serves any safety purpose, called abolishing it a meaningful policy, and went further, describing the agency as, quote, essentially comprised of white supremacists. Don't just take my word for it. I want you to listen to this, not just hear me describe it.
ICE is a rogue agency, and they no longer serve any sort of safety. Abolishing ICE is a meaningful policy if we want to keep each other safe. And the plan has to be not only providing resources for every person to know, whether it's know your rights training, legal observer training, making sure that we're only calling Kavusa's hotline when there actually is ICE agents present, or when you know somebody that is detained. Please share information and and don't spread panic. I think that in order for us to make sure that everyone feels safe in our state. It's important to recognize what we can and cannot do. And then in the legislature, I introduced the Keep Families Together Act, No Secret Police, ensure we end 287G agreements, ensure that we do not have ICE detention centers, and that there are grants for immigrants who need representation in the courts. And there has to be resourcing community resistance, but also knowing that via executive order and directive to the legislature, and ensuring that the attorney general is able to take action against an agency that is rogue, that is essentially comprised of white supremacists. They will come after folks. It doesn't matter who you are, that we build that community resistance, and that we expect every single elected official to share widely that ICE out.
Chris Robb, a 5-term Pennsylvania state representative who won his primary and will be in the general election for Pennsylvania's 3rd congressional district, was asked on Fox News' Hannity whether he wants to dismantle ICE. His answer? Absolutely. And he went further, calling ICE facilities concentration camps. Here's that exchange.
You want to abolish ICE?
Absolutely. And dismantle the immigrant concentration camps.
And this isn't new. Back in 2018, when Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was first running for Congress, she told CNN that ICE's very structure was illegitimate, tracing it back to the Patriot Act and the Iraq War, and argued the agency's, quote, extrajudicial nature is baked into it. Don't just take my word for it. I want you to listen to this, not just hear me describe it.
You have called for a number of things, one of them being to abolish ICE. And you recently traveled to the border to Tornillo, Texas, to see the shelters, to see where some of these separated families are being held. What would you replace ICE with? And do we not need protection at the border?
Well, we absolutely do need to make sure that our borders are secure, to make sure that people are safe in passage. But what we need to realize and remember is that ICE was established in 2003, right at the same time as the Patriot Act, the AUMF, the Iraq War. And we look back at a lot of that time and legislation as a mistake now. And I think that ICE is right there as a part of it. It has its extrajudicial nature is baked in to the structure of the agency, and that is why they're able to get away with black sites at our border, with the separation of children. We are committing human rights abuses on this border and separating children from their families, and that is part of the structure of the agency. We can replace it, and we can replace it with a humane agency that is directed towards safe passage.
That's a sitting member of Congress, and she said it 7 years before Hong, Larkin, and Robb said their versions of the same thing. This isn't a new idea gaining ground. It's an old idea that's finally winning primaries. After the break, defunding the police, hostility to Israel, and a sitting Democratic Socialists of America national co-chair calling for abolishing the U.S. Senate on Fox News, in her own words. Democratic member of the Pennsylvania State Senate, representing the 38th District, Lindsey Williams, argues there are no biological differences between men and women, stating that, quote, female bodies are just as strong, as fast, and as capable as male bodies. Here's what she had to say.
Female bodies are just as strong, as fast and capable as male bodies. For what reason, other than political gain, are we spending time and taxpayer dollars on a completely made-up issue? Participating in sports gave me the confidence, time management skills, and ability to work collaboratively. Absolutely nothing about having a trans teammate or competitor would have taken those things away from me.
The Democratic House Education and Workforce Committee's official Democratic office in 2023 wrote in a statement, quote, the inclusion of transgender athletes in women's sports is not a threat to survival or success of women's sports. Francesca Hong again in Wisconsin. In 2021, she posted that police, quote, exist to uphold white supremacy, and wrote, quote, defund, then abolish, reform cannot be an option. When Israel In August of 2020, Daria-Liza Avila-Chevalier, who won the Democratic primary for New York's 13th district, reposted a response to a hypothetical about Israel disappearing. Her reply, quote, "Israel doesn't exist." The original account has since been deleted, but CNN reported on it directly. Separately, Malat Kiros, the Democrat nominee who beat 15-term Congresswoman Diana DeJette in Colorado, wrote a 2023 essay arguing that questioning Israel's legitimacy as a state should not be treated as anti-Semitism at all, accusing the Israeli government of weaponizing the charge to silence critics. In 2019, Congresswoman Ilhan Omar tweeted in response to a tweet from a journalist questioning why U.S. political leaders always defend Israel, quote, "It's all about the Benjamins, baby." She received considerable backlash from both sides, including from Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who stated that it was hurtful and anti-Semitic. Now, here's the one I think you need to hear in full context, because it's the most direct. Democratic Socialists of America national co-chair Megan Romer, on Fox News Sunday this past July, was asked point blank by anchor Shannon Bream about members of Congress who currently caucus with Democrats and support the Democratic Socialists of America. Would they lose their Senate seats under the DSA's own platform? Romer didn't dodge it. She called the Senate, quote, "an anachronistic institution borrowed from the British House of Lords," said it exists, quote, "to protect power and to make sure, quote, people don't have too much of a say," and said the Democratic Socialists of America want a single-chamber Congress. Let's listen to that exchange in full.
Okay, so then let's go back through some of those then. Abolish the Senate. There are people who are in the Senate now who are very supportive of DSA. They lose their seats?
Well, the Senate is an anachronistic institution. It comes from the British House of Lords. It is made to protect power for, the Senate was part of the system that was made to make sure that the people didn't have too much of a say. So we want to expand Congress significantly, but make it a unicameral legislature.
And Clara Valdez, who just won the Democratic primary for New York's 7th district with 56% of the vote, closed her own victory speech with 4 lines, quote, "Solidarity forever, abolish ICE, free Palestine, organize your union, and join DSA." Here's the moment itself.
Solidarity forever, abolish ICE, free Palestine, organize your union, and join DSA. Thank you so much.
That's not a fringe activist at a rally who is going to be in the United States House of Representatives, closing her victory speech with, "Join DSA." Now, to the quotes that don't just criticize American policy, they attack the United States itself. I'm going to start with Barack Obama's own pastor. I want to warn you, some of this is genuinely hard to hear. I said I'd start with Obama's preacher, and I meant it. In the days after September 11, 2001, Reverend Jeremiah Wright, Barack Obama's pastor for 20 years, the man who married him, baptized his children, told his congregation that, quote, "America's chickens are coming home to roost," directly comparing the September 11th attacks to the casualties of America's own overseas military action. That's not a criticism of a specific policy. That's a suggestion that 3,000 murdered Americans had it coming to them. In 2018, Governor Andrew Cuomo, in response to President Trump's "Make America Great Again" slogan, stated that America was never that great. Don't take my word for it. Listen to Governor Cuomo.
And look, the simple point is all this comes down to this. We're not going to make America great again. It was never that great. We have not reached greatness. We will reach greatness when every American is fully engaged. We will reach greatness when discrimination and stereotyping against women, 51% of our population, is gone, and every woman's full potential is realized and unleashed, and every woman is making her full contribution. When that happens, this nation is going to be taken even higher, because we have not yet fully liberated the women in this country, and we will.
Francesca Hong, in a since-deleted tweet from November 2020, called for canceling Thanksgiving entirely, describing it as a celebration of, quote, colonialism and the original super-spreader event that killed indigenous men and women. Daria-Liza Avila-Chevalier, in December of 2019, said, quote, I forget to get napkins, so I just wiped my hand on the American flag behind me. Now, I think maybe because I'm an Army brat, my dad served 26 years in uniform, I know how many people have died for our flag. I know how deeply most Americans are proud of our flag. For some reason, that particular quote, I'll repeat, I forgot to get napkins, so I just wiped my hand on the American flag behind me. I found that personally really disgusting. In Michigan, Abdul El-Sayed, now the Democratic Senate nominee, in a race so close it took the Associated Press 12 hours to call, was caught on leaked audio from a March campaign call declining to say anything critical about the death of Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, explaining there were, quote, a lot of people in Dearborn who are sad today. Hear it for yourself.
So, again, this is going to destabilize the region. I also want to remind you guys that there are a lot of people in Dearborn who are sad today. Mm-hmm. So, I just don't want to comment on Khamenei at all. I don't think it's worth even touching that.
When CNN's Jake Tapper pressed him on that comment in July, El-Sayed didn't walk it back. He pivoted to criticizing the war itself, saying America shouldn't have been fighting it, backed by the prime minister of a foreign government. Let's listen to that follow-up, too, because I think the non-answer is as revealing as the original comment.
The war with Iran is clearly heating up. 3 U.S. service members, 2 were killed and 1 is missing overnight. They were stationed in Jordan. 20 weeks ago, when Iran's supreme leader was killed, you told your staff, according to audio obtained by the Washington Free Beacon, quote, there are a lot of people in Dearborn who are sad today, so I just don't want to comment on Khamenei at all, unquote. I thought that quote was interesting because the Ayatollah has killed tens of thousands of innocent Iranians, not to mention the proxies that Iran has funded that have killed innocent civilians all over the Middle East. Why were you worried about offending people who support the Ayatollah?
Jake, on a day where we're mourning the loss of 2 more service members in a war we never should have fought, I think all of us ought to step back and ask whether or not everybody in Michigan, frankly, everybody in America, shouldn't be sad about the fact that this president, backed by the prime minister of a foreign government, took us to a war we had no business fighting in. So yeah, I didn't want to comment on it then because it's a ridiculous pretext. And now you're asking me about the Ayatollah, who's dead, by the way, and you're not asking me about the service members who've died. You're not asking me about whether or not this war should have ever been fought. You're not asking me about whether or not the costs that are being borne by Michiganders in the tax dollars we pay or the gas prices that are insane right now are worth it. And so, look, let's have a conversation based in Michigan. I'm running for Senate in Michigan. And I think here in Michigan, all of us are probably sad about the fact that we went to war that we never should have fought. I'd rather our money be spent here.
I want to say plainly what I'm arguing here, because precision matters. I'm not telling you every Democrat believes these things. I'm telling you that a party which nominates candidates who say these things on tape, on the record, not in some anonymous leak, has a coalition problem it isn't fixing. In fact, it's electing these people. After the break, what this coalition actually believes about free enterprise in their own words, and in one Missouri grocery store that already ran the experiment for us. Here's a number worth knowing before we get into the quotes. My own organization, America's New Majority Project, polled this in October of 2025 and found 45% of voters prefer free market capitalism against just 10% who chose big government socialism, a 35-point margin. Despite that, candidate after candidate in this new Democratic coalition runs directly against the American people. However, I should notice that a recent poll from CBS News YouGov found that 58% of Democrats viewed socialism positively, compared with 32% who viewed capitalism the same way. Half of Democrats viewed capitalism negatively, while only 18% had a negative view of socialism. This is really important because it shows that many Democrats do view socialism in a positive light and capitalism in a negative one. And as a historian, I think this is the first time in American history that a major party has had more people favoring socialism than favoring free enterprise. I think it's truly a very troubling historic moment. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez on PBS's firing line back in 2018 said plainly that, quote, capitalism means profit at any cost, and argued the country didn't operate on a capitalist economy when it was founded. Listen to her say it.
Capitalism, what that means is profit at any cost. Capitalism has not always existed in the world, and it will not always exist in the world. When this country started, we were not a capitalist. We did not operate on a capitalist economy.
And by the way, she's just plain historically wrong. The founders of the United States were all committed to free enterprise, and all would have thought that socialism was impossible. Chris Rabb, the same Pennsylvania candidate from Act 3, told the Wall Street Journal just last month that Social Security, Medicare, and public education are all, in his own words, socialist programs. Malat Kiros, on that same firing line program this past July, said she doesn't think there's anything more American than an economic philosophy she called the only one capable of delivering, quote, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, meaning socialism, not the free enterprise system that actually built the country. Listen to her at that moment.
I don't think there's anything more American than subscribing to an economic philosophy that, as the evidence shows, is the only one that's actually capable of delivering things like life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I really can't think of anything else.
Mayor Mondami, back in 2020, tweeted at then Governor Cuomo that low taxes create, quote, an environment where it's easy for bosses to steal from workers, and closed with 4 words, quote, capitalism is theft. His phrase, not mine. He said taxation isn't theft, capitalism is, which, by the way, is remarkably close to Karl Marx's writing. Now, here's where this actually costs real money. Mamdani is now advancing a $70 million municipal initiative for city-run grocery stores in New York, promising a 30% discount on essentials by operating, quote, without having to pay rent or property taxes. Kansas City already ran this experiment. The city bought the Linwood Shopping Center in 2016, opened a government-run Sun Fresh Market in 2018, spent more than $17 million taxpayer dollars trying to keep it stocked and safe, and it closed for good in August of last year anyway, plagued by empty shelves and crime the whole way through. I mean, let me just ask you, do you really think a bunch of bureaucrats working for Mamdani are going to be more effective, better organized, understand customers better than Amazon, Walmart, Target, Kroger? I mean, just think about all these companies that spend all day, every day, trying to figure out how to deliver what you want at the grocery store at the lowest possible cost. And now, magically, we're going to have a politician, the mayor of New York, who's going to recruit bureaucrats who are going to somehow be smarter than these companies. You know it's not going to work. Kiros, in an interview with Denverite, went even further than the grocery stores, arguing that, quote, most innovation is coming from government-funded research, not private enterprise, not the entrepreneurs who actually build the products they use every day. I would have to say, having known Sam Walton, I don't somehow think Sam relied on government funding research to invent Walmart. Now, The part of this argument that isn't quotes at all, it's votes. Actual roll call votes on actual bills that prove this is the whole party. This isn't just a handful of nutty people. It's not just a handful of quotes. It is virtually every elected Democrat. You know, a critic can always say I've cherry-picked the loudest voices for quotes. Votes are different. A roll call is math, and math doesn't care who's loud. My own organization, America's New Majority Project's polling from May, found 55% support using the Alien Enemies Act to remove gang-affiliated illegal immigrants, including 89% of Republicans, but also 28% of Democrats and 48% of independents. Despite that, Democrats, including Ilhan Omar, came out against it as a block, with Omar calling it at a Congressional Democrats press briefing a repeat of, quote, one of the most shameful chapters in American history. Judge the comparison yourself.
The last time the Alien Enemies Act was invoked, it was used to detain and deport German, Japanese, Italian immigrants during World War II. One of the most shameful chapters of American history. Now, Stephen Miller and Donald Trump are preparing to dust off the law for their plan for mass deportation. This will be another moral stain on our country.
The votes themselves tell the same story, bill after bill. The No Bailout for Sanctuary Cities Act passed the House 219 to 186, with only 12 Democrats voting yes and 186 voting no. The Protecting American Agriculture from Foreign Adversaries Act, a bill to screen foreign purchases of American farmland, passed 269 to 149, with 148 Democrats voting no. The SAVE Act, requiring proof of citizenship to register to vote, passed 220 to 208, with only 4 Democrats voting yes, despite the fact that America's New Majority Project polling found 71% call proof of citizenship registration common sense, and separately, 79% say letting illegal immigrants vote in local and state elections is simply crazy, a view shared by 92% of conservatives, 77% of moderates, and 67% of liberals. Pew separately found 83% of all adults, including 67% of Democrats, support voter photo ID outright. I want you to notice something before I go on, because it's easy to let these numbers blur together. Every one of these bills cleared a bar most legislation in Washington never comes close to. Public support in the 70s and 80s, crossing party lines among actual voters. And every one of them still lost the entire Democratic caucus, or very nearly all of it. That's not 4 unrelated votes. That's a pattern. And patterns are what historians look for. The pattern holds. The Laken-Riley Act, requiring detention of illegal immigrants charged with theft or burglary, passed 263 to 156. 46 Democrats actually voted yes on that one, credit where it's due, but 156 of their colleagues voted no. Some of the Democrats who voted yes had to apologize to their base for voting yes. For example, Representative Angie Craig of Minnesota ran for the U.S. Senate and had to apologize and express regret for having voted for the Laken-Riley Act, because in a Democratic primary in Minnesota, that was totally unacceptable. And by the way, she lost the primary. On CBS News Minnesota, she stated she regretted any vote that gives ICE more power. Here is that moment.
You have since said that you regret voting for it.
I realized, standing in front of the Whipple Detention Center, looking at semi-automatic weapons, that voting to give Trump's ICE any additional authority was a mistake. People in the 2nd District in Minnesota are used to me being honest with them, whether it's calling for Joe Biden to step aside and not running again, So I'm always going to be honest with the people of Minnesota, and I do regret that vote, giving them any authority.
Senator Amy Klobuchar, Senator Smith, Congresswomen Omar, McCollum, and Morrison, they all voted against it, and my opponent was the only one who voted for it. I appreciate that she regrets the vote, but I also think we are in a time where we deserve leaders who vote their values all of the time.
The Protection of Women and Girls in Sports Act passed the House 218 to 206. Only 2 Democrats voted yes, and 7 Democrats unanimously filibustered it, 51 to 45, despite Pew finding 73% of Americans uncomfortable with trans athletes competing outside their birth sex, and Gallup separately finding 69% believe athletes should compete on teams that match their birth sex. The One Big Beautiful Bill Act passed the House 218 to 214 with 0 Democratic votes. Only 2 Republicans, Thomas Massey and Brian Fitzpatrick, voted no alongside them. A bill that, had it failed, would have meant an average tax increase of $1,770 for American families. Think about that. 212 Democrats voted no, knowing that it would raise taxes on Americans if their vote worked. In the Restoring American Energy Mid-Dominance Act, passed 216 to 200. Only 3 Democrats voted yes. 7 bills, 7 different issues: immigration enforcement, farmland security, election integrity, criminal detention, women's sports, taxes, and energy. 7 different levels of public support, every one of them well above what it normally takes to pass anything in the Congress. I've spent 50 years watching Congress, and I can tell you, it's rare to find an issue where the public and Washington are this far apart. 7 in a single Congress on a single party's watch is not an accident. It's a coalition that has decided which fights it's willing to lose the country over. One more thing before we close, and it's the part of this episode that ties the money back to everything else we've talked about, including a brand new congressional report that names names. My own organization, America's New Majority Project, found in polling from June of last year that 72% supported saving an estimated $1.6 trillion over 10 years just by eliminating waste and fraud from government programs. Here's why that number matters. In fiscal year 2024, federal agencies reported about $162 billion in improper payments, actually a decrease of $74 billion from the year before, mostly because COVID-era programs were winding down. That improvement didn't last. For fiscal 2025, the number went back up to $186 billion. Since the government started tracking this in 2003, the cumulative total is roughly $3 trillion, and GAO's own analysts separately estimate that fraud specifically, not just paperwork errors, fraud costs somewhere between $233 billion and $521 billion every single year. That's between $2 and $5 trillion over a decade. Let's go back 15 years for a second because the pattern isn't new. Under the Obama administration's stimulus-era green energy loan program, company after company collected federal money and then went bankrupt. Solyndra, $535 million of your tax money, gone in 2 years, with the Department of Energy's own Inspector General later concluding the company had given the government misleading information to get the loan in the first place. Abound Solar, $70 million dispersed before bankruptcy after the company sold defective products. First Solar, a $3 billion guarantee, followed by mass layoffs. Beacon Power, $43 million, bankrupt within 2 years. NR1, $118.5 million, bankrupt in 2012. A123 Systems, $132 million collected before its own bankruptcy. Fisker Automotive, $193 million dispersed of a $529 million commitment on an electric car that ended up being recalled for battery fires. Congressman Cliff Stearns, chairing the House investigation at the time, put it about as well as it can be put. Quote, one bankruptcy may be a fluke, two could be coincidence, but three is a trend. Now to Minnesota, because this is happening right now, and it just got a lot worse for the people who let it happen. We've covered the underlying scheme before in this series, the nonprofit Feeding Our Future, which prosecutors call the largest pandemic fraud scheme in American history. Somewhere between $250 and $350 million stolen using fake meal accounts and shell companies. What's new is this. On June 8th of this year, the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform released a 205-page report, quote, The Cost of Doing Nothing, How Tim Walz and Keith Ellison Fueled Minnesota's Fraud Explosion. It concludes that Governor Walz and Attorney General Ellison knew about the fraud as early as 2019, had the legal authority to stop the payments and ban the fraudulent providers, and simply didn't. The committee's own number, roughly $300 million in child nutrition funds lost outright, potentially another $9 billion in Medicaid-related funds lost or placed at serious risk. Vice President Vance has since referred both Walz and Ellison to the Justice Department for criminal fraud investigation. This wasn't a rogue nonprofit slipping through the cracks. This was, according to Congress's own investigators, senior elected Democrats who knew and looked away. Nearly 100 people, the majority being Somali immigrants, were charged with their involvement in the Feeding Our Future scam. There's another fraud case in Ohio involving a majority of Somali immigrants. Fraudsters manipulated elderly Ohio residents, many of them family members, to make fraudulent Medicaid claims costing taxpayers $1.2 billion. Ohio had expanded its Medicare program to allow states to provide home-based health care and cover non-medical personal care services, such as cooking and cleaning. Fraudsters billed Medicaid for personal care services that were never provided. These home health care companies operated out of largely abandoned buildings. It doesn't stop there. Gene Dodaro, the Comptroller General of the United States, testified to Congress in 2023 that federal agencies, quote, did not strategically manage fraud risk going into the pandemic. A U.S. Department of Agriculture report found nearly 6 million people received food stamps through a loophole that doesn't require them to actually meet federal income or asset limits. 3.8 million of them over the income cutoff outright. A separate estimate from the Foundation for Government Accountability puts the number even higher, at 5.9 million people enrolled through the same loophole despite not meeting federal requirements, 1 in 5 of them sitting on more than $100,000 in assets while still collecting food assistance. And an FCC Inspector General report from this January found the Lifeline subsidized internet program sent roughly $5 million to nearly 117,000 dead people. Let me repeat that. 117,000 dead people, with at least 16,774 of them, and the report said possibly as many as 39,000 enrolled after they had died, making you wonder who was doing the enrolling and who was collecting the check. That's the machine. Not a few bad actors, a pattern in Washington, in Minnesota, in program after program of a governing philosophy that keeps asking for more control over your money while proving year after year it can't be trusted with the money it already has. So here's the case, stated plainly across everything we've covered. The Democratic Party has drifted from the tradition of Roosevelt and Kennedy into something its own candidates now defend in the most radical terms available. Abolishing ICE, defunding the police, open hostility to Israel, abolishing the Senate, denigrating this country's flag and its history, on tape, in their own words. It's a party whose economic philosophy a supermajority of Americans reject by a 35-point margin, and whose response to that rejection is bigger government, not less of it. A $70 million grocery store plan in New York City after Kansas City already proved the model fails. It's a party that votes as a unified bloc against solutions most Americans, often including most Democratic voters, actually support. On immigration, on voting, on women's sports, on taxes, on energy. And it's a party whose own machine keeps proving it can't be trusted with the money it's already been given. $186 billion in improper payments in a single year. $3 trillion since 2003. In Washington under President Obama and in Minnesota under Governor Walz alike. It keeps proving, in Congress's own words, that they knew about the fraud and chose to look away. That combination is the argument, not a caricature. Names, dates, dollar figures, and wherever we can get it, their voices on tape. That's building block one of how to win 2026, delivered the same way every episode in this series is built, not with a slogan, but with the receipts. Next time in this series, we turn to building block two, the Republican plan for affordability and good jobs paired with an honest accounting of where the Iran war actually stands. Same standard, the real numbers, including the ones that don't flatter the argument. Newt's World is produced by Gingrich 360 and iHeartMedia. Our executive producer is Garnsey Sloan. Our researcher is Rachel Peterson. Special thanks to the team at Gingrich 360. If you've been enjoying Newt's World, I hope you'll go to Apple Podcasts and both rate us with 5 stars and give us a review so others can learn what it's all about. Join me on Substack at Gingrich360.net. I'm Newt Gingrich. This is Newt's World.